Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is AJ from the Paladin Journal, and welcome back to another weekly review for Star Wars The Acolyte. And this week we're going to talk about episode 4 called The Day. It is directed by Alex Garcia Lopez and it's written by Claire Kieshel and Cor Adana. Now, just a high level summary for the episode. I thought it was a banger episode. Last week we had a flashback episode where we learned some more backstory for our main characters, May and Osha. And this week we're jumping back into the present and we are getting like banger story one after the other. And I was so surprised by all of what we got. And I have to say that this episode really highlights the high extremes that this show can go to. It had some mystery, it had horror elements to it. We learn a bit more about the relationship between May and Chimere and the relationships they have respectively with their master, the so-called Acolyte, who is the villain of the show. And we even learn more about how the Jedi are operating at this time. And the last like 5 or 6 minutes of this episode, just like chef's kiss, absolutely brilliant stuff. And I really hope that, this continues further down the line. Now, just to delve into the details of this episode, we start off with going back to Kofar, where Master Kelnaka is kind of exiled. It seems he's being stationed there by the Order, but he's kind of living as a hermit. And later on in the episode, we learn that, he hasn't contacted the Jedi Order for like almost a year now. So there's probably some resentment that he has towards the Order or some guilt that he has, same as Master Torben that we saw in episode 2. And one of the really neat things about the opening was that we see that the home that Kelnaka has built for himself out of the remains of some kind of a ship that he had is the walls are covered with a lot of different symbology, sorry. And a lot of that is a reference to the yin and yang that we know as a modern audience from Chinese philosophies. And, it is probably highlighting the conflict that is going to happen between May and Osha, because right now, as things stand, we see Osha as a light character and May as a dark character. And, it even references the duality between a lot of different characters in the overall Star Wars lore, such as the duality between Anakin, the duality of Luke and Leia, and so many other characters from the past and the present of the Star Wars lore of this point. So I thought this was a really good start. It immediately connects you with the episode previous, and it shows that there is something going on with Kelnaka, and it makes you want to keep watching to see, oh, are they going to reveal what really happened on Brendok 16 years ago? Because something bad did happen. And I do have some more theories about that I'll go into later. But, from there we shift on to back on Coruscant at the Jedi Order, and Jeki is undergoing a training session with one of the masters for lightsaber combat. And I thought it was really interesting in the sense that, they're really trying to show you how regimented and systematic the Jedi are at this time. We've seen some of it in the prequel series, in the Clone Wars, and some of the other books that have come out about that era in the last like 25 years, 30 years. And, it just adds more to the world building that this show is doing with respect to the lore, because, it's a small perspective at what's going on, but it does lend itself to the larger stories. And it's more or less it's a pattern of how the Jedi are living their lives now. They have a strict system of learning, and they have just given themselves over to it. There's little spontaneity, which is why characters like Master Soul and Master Qui-Gon Jinn and even Anakin as a whole, and through all of them, as we see with Obi-Wan and Ahsoka and so many other characters who belong to the Order over the years, we see why they were so different. Because in a lot of ways, they go against the grain. And this is very small perspective of that commentary that maybe the Jedi are living too strict lives, and they need to be more open to the moment and more open to what is going on around them, rather than learning things by rote just because that's what they have to do. And this was a really good scene additionally because it gave us a friendship between Jackie and Osha. We saw a little bit of it kind of in episode 2, but we really do see a lot more of this in this episode. And I thought it was a really nice touch to humanize the characters and show us what they're really like, because it's in their interactions and with the dialogue that they have that reveals what they think about each other. And we see that Jackie is not really as I wouldn't say hostile, but she's not as much thinking against Osha as possibly she could have if we just go by episode 1, where she's talking to Master Soul about why do you keep old holos of your Padawan? She's gone out of the order. And to him it's not about sentimentality, it's more about preserving the memories. And maybe she's like she's taking more of that on. So this is like we see the development of Jackie's character, and we learn a little bit more about what Osha is going through as well, because she's talking about May to her at this moment. And it's like, I want to know more, but it kind of isn't my problem. I want to leave that in the past. She's been trying to run from that for the last 16 years, and there is an opportunity here, but she's hesitant to take it. Which, as we learn down the episode, the relationships are very complicated, as we see in the dialogue that May has with Chimere, and some of the things that she says. It's like she wants more. She's stuck in this life as an assassin, and she's really struggling against what is required of her, and she is seriously scared of her master and the deal that she's made with him, as Chimere puts it, which was all like, it was really interesting that what the relationship is here, because generally between a Jedi master and their Padawan, it's a relationship of trust and respect, and you know obeying a higher authority, so to speak. But here with the Sith, things are a lot different. The relationships are based on fear, mistrust, deception, and just outright hostility. Because, of course, the only way the apprentice becomes a master is by killing the master for the Sith under Bane's lineage. So that's what we have. And I really like that they tried to ramp up the different horror elements throughout this episode, because one of the many things that people have been asking is, well, since we learn about the show, is what the hell is the Jedi Council doing? And we learn in this episode during these scenes on Coruscant that there's a much bigger network that the council has in place for the structure of the Jedi. So the group that is being run by Master Vernestra, and seconding Master Soul to her missions at this moment, it's like they are part of the security division, I guess, of the Jedi Order, and they report to the High Council. And I'm believing that this time, it's Master Yoda is on the High Council, and there's some other ones. We actually do see Master Ki-Adi-Mundi, I believe. He's in this episode, but he's clearly not part of the High Council. So he's part of this lower council that oversees the security of the Jedi and the investigative nature of things. That they're dealing with the more banal stuff that the High Council itself wouldn't address. And that was a really neat cameo, and it's so interesting because there's a whole thing about, oh, they don't want to tell the High Council what exactly is going on. They're trying to keep things from the High Council, because then it becomes a political issue, and the High Council is bound to inform the Senate, which I thought was really interesting, because while the Jedi do serve the Republic and the Senate, it's more like, if the Council wants to keep something to itself, it does. That's a lot of what they do in the prequel trilogy, even though, there is a moment where Mace tells Yoda and the others that, we have to inform the Senate that our ability to sense the Force is going dim or something to that effect. So this was really interesting stuff, and it kind of answers some questions about why the High Council was so surprised in Episode One to hear that Qui-Gon had fought a potential Sith, and it's just like, oh my God, there's so many webs of lies and mistrust even within the Order. Although it's not something extreme, but it's more like you know it shows how the Jedi have given over to politics and stuff, and they're not as open with each other as they should be because just reasons at this point. So moving on from that, also there was so much character development in this episode, and pretty much every scene gives you something new. There are so many scenes between May and Chimere, and I referenced some of that already. But also, people are suspecting that Chimere is the Acolyte, and I can kind of see why, based on stuff from episode 2 and now this episode as well. Why they would think that? Because there are certain coincidences that happen and certain actions that are performed by Chimere, which make think, there's something here. But overall, I'm thinking that it's a red herring, and this is my out there theory about all of this right now. I think personally that the Acolyte is Mother Coral, who is the woman who gave birth to the twins, as we learned in episode 3. Mother Mother Anisea, she is the one who conceived the twins, who created them, but Mother Coril is the one who gave birth to them. She carried them for however long the pregnancy was, and because her body is not shown in the climax of episode 3, we see Mother Anisea's body, but we don't see her body, and she's not really referenced either in the end. So I'm thinking that there's something that happened on Brenda, and it is quite possible that the Sith were involved, because there is a direct correlation between what Mother Anisea and Coral did and what Darth Plagueis was attempting to do during the prequel era, when he is trying to create life from the Force itself, but he's failing, and then the Force ends up creating Anakin as a response to his presumably horrible experiments that were really tipping the imbalance of the Force further, where the power of the Sith is concentrated in two individuals, and the Jedi have had their power diffused because they've grown so large, and they're not just like bureaucracy on par with the senatorial bureaucracy of the Republic. So there is something going on, and I'm thinking the Sith were responsible in some way, and Coral, she was involved in the confrontation that happens with the Jedi towards the end, and there's something. I'm thinking it's Coral. There are signs that point to that. I just actually, finished watching both episodes again, 3 and 4, just to confirm, because there is a shot towards the end that makes me really think that Coral is the Acolyte. And, I'll go into that in a bit. But overall, there's also the thing where, there's so much more to the story. Things are really not as simple as we thought they were. And, episode 3 is pretty much all from the perspective of Osha herself, as I'm sure I said in my review of that episode. And, there is the kind of sense that, there's an unreliable narrator thing going on. So we need to see the events from the perspective of May, possibly from Mother Anisea's perspective in some way, possibly from Mother Coral, and definitely the Jedi. Because, Soul also references that he's going to tell Osha everything, and so which really adds fuel to the fire about, were the Jedi themselves responsible for the destruction of the Coven, or were they manipulated into that? I'm thinking they were manipulated, because that really fits the theme of the rise of the Sith during the prequels. So that is all there. Now, moving on from that, there were some more cameos and some special appearances that I thought were really good. So we already have Ki-Adi-Mundi, who shows up, and he's someone who's like, this possibly cannot be a Jedi. There's has to be something more here, and definitely not a Sith. there's a conversation that happens with the different masters. So, they are sure of themselves that they're all going to get, shocked by what actually ends up happening. So we also see a Keldor Jedi, which, I saw the character and first I was like, oh my god, is that Master Plo Koon? Although that would kind of imply that, he is quite young at this point, based on some things I read from discussions online, but also that, it turns out that it's not Plo Koon himself, but a different Keldor Jedi, which I thought was fantastic. I would have loved to see Plo Koon, but I'm happy seeing another prominent Keldor Jedi because that adds to the world building, right? The galaxy is huge. There's like, hundreds, thousands of different species all over the galaxy at any point in time. And there's so much diversity within the order. And yet, we have so many human Jedi. So why not, having a bunch of different Keldor Jedi? Master Plo Koon is obviously the most prominent example that we've seen over the years. But this character, I don't know what's going to happen with this character down the line from this episode forwards. But I'm hoping we see more such stuff like in the future. Because it adds more like maybe there are some species that are represented more than others, and it's not just we see humans all the time, different varieties, whether they're from Corellia or Coruscant or Skewjon or Tatooine or whatever, apes, anything. Referencing some of my other notes, there's also a huge Jedi, possibly a Jedi, called Basil, who is a Tinnin, and he is a tracker. And his role in this episode is a little bit minor, but what is really interesting was the commentary that we get secondhand from Yord, because Yord makes a comment to Osha during one of their many talks in this episode that while most Padawans tend to learn Shiriwook, which is the Wookiee language, he wanted to learn something different, and he went for the Tinnin language, and that is why he can understand what Basil says, because Basil doesn't speak the common tongue, or he doesn't speak common, which I believe is the word that's used for the English-like language that everyone speaks in Star Wars. And I thought that was really neat. Again, it adds to the world building that it's not all about Padawans learning the default state of affairs, but they do get a more comprehensive education, and we do see throughout that some of them can talk to droids or they understand droids, so to speak, and there's more to that, I'm sure, in random episodes of Clone Wars, maybe even instances somewhere in the prequel movies. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I thought this was really neat. It shows you more of the world, more of the Order, and it's the dichotomy of the Jedi Order being a closed order, so to speak, but it's also very open because there are people from all sorts of different cultures, and there is a lot of cross contamination that happens with culture, with the languages, with the dressing sense, everything. And this was really nice, subtle example of how there's so much more to the Order. So it's you learn about so much more of what's happening in the galaxy and the different races and the cultures and everything. Really good stuff. What really tripped me over though was the last 5-6 minutes of this episode, and this is where the horror elements they really ramp up, because we see that not only what May is afraid of with respect to her master, but we see a sort of awakening within Osha as well. We know that she failed as a Jedi, and she left the Order, and she has tried to use the Force in episode 1, but didn't quite work out as she wanted. And but there is something that is awakening within her, and I'm thinking that as I see a lot of people having the same opinion as well, I'm thinking that there's going to be a turn very soon, and May comes back to the light, so to speak, but Osha falls to the darkness, which would be an interesting twist in the story. But I think it's more to ramp up, like I said, the horror elements, because someone you trust, who you have known since childhood, and that person, if they go to the dark side, and there's a betrayal involved and stuff, and there's going to be a lot of dead Jedi by the end of this episode. So it's like, it really makes you think about, oh my god, there's so many different paths that the story can take, and it just keeps you hyping. It just keeps hyping you up for what's gonna happen next. And then Master Soul is like, he's a little different from most Jedi, because they just go into a situation confident and arrogant, but he has a more considered approach. He uses his force perception a lot. We saw little instances of it in episodes 1 and 2, and even a little bit in 3. But I think episode 4 is where you really see that he has a very strong connection to the Force, and he can sense things better than others can, which is probably one of the many reasons he is on this mission, despite Master Vernesra's thoughts otherwise, because she is concerned about him being so close to the girls, and but he is someone that needs to be there, because he started all of this 16 years ago, and he needs to finish it. And this force perception thing that Master Saul has going on in this episode, it happens once, twice, it happens 3 times. And it's like, dude, there has to be a really strong connection here. Which, again, makes me go back to Brendock and what happened, and the death of the Coven, and the Acolyte being Mother Coral. There is a very strong connection here that we really need to see more of in future episodes. There's only 4 more episodes to go, roughly 2 hours of story, probably a little less, accounting for ads and whatnot, and the recap times in each episode that's left. But man, I'm on the edge of my seat. And those like absolute last few minutes, and we see the Acolyte full on having a confrontation, and it was like you feel chills, man. Seriously. And you go, what the hell? And it's like, it happened so early. I wasn't expecting this confrontation to happen in this episode. I was thinking it'd be more like something, kept for like maybe episode 6, probably maybe even a little bit in episode 5, but definitely not ending the first half of the season on that moment. And it's like he just arrives, or they arrive, and it's the most chilling thing in the entire season so far. And it's probably one of the most like supernatural elements of a force user showing off their power. And you know it's like something straight off a horror movie or horror TV show, and you're just like, you almost like flinch when that happens, but it's like you can feel the tension. It's sharp enough to cut apart steel or whatever, you know, as is a common trope in these things. But man, that final few minutes is absolutely stellar. There are a few things that have been done better in Star Wars to date, especially in modern Star Wars. And man, I am so pumped. And it just makes me so angry as well, because this is not where I wanted to end this episode. I wanted to see so much more. And it's like, it really frustrates me that this show, it's only like 25-ish minutes, 26 minutes an episode. There's so much more that they could be doing. You know, it's like, I like the tight story, but also, it's like 4 hours isn't enough. 4 hours of story is not enough for what they're trying to do here. And there's so much more of the great cinematic stuff that's going on. The extended look that we get about Kofar, and that there's a darkness there. So maybe the planet has some kind of a dark connection to the Force, maybe, which is why Kelnaka is there, why he's exploring the Coven magic there. And even Soul says there's a darkness here, something rotten, and it just lends itself more to, what really is Kelnaka doing here? Why is the Acolyte here? And does this planet really have a connection to the dark side of the Force? Like, what was the world that Yoda was on? The planet that he was on exile. So it's maybe something like that. It's definitely no Korriban, which was one of the many homeworlds of the Sith 1,000 years ago. But there's definitely something here, and it has drawn all these characters here, and there's such a big confrontation going on, and it's like, oh my god, it's like the next 6 days are going to be so tough. The next 7 days are going to be so tough because it's like this wasn't like if this was going to be like a mid-season cliffhanger, this is the best place to be that because it's going to generate so much discussion online and it's going to make people crazy for what's going to happen next. And thankfully, it's only a week that we have to wait instead of, possible weeks or even months, as typical mid seasons usually go for in longer television shows, which are syndicated and whatnot. So, overall, yeah, some really beautiful visual stuff. Excellent story overall, I would say. The beats were perfect. There was a lot of jumping around of the perspectives between the Jedi and May and Chimere, but I thought it worked really well because it adds to the chaos that happens at the end of the episode. So I thought it was really beautifully done. I want to see more of Kofar. I want to learn more about this planet, and also it's like it's such a different location than we've gotten in almost all of Star Wars to date. Like the only thing that even remotely fits is Endor because it was a forest moon, and Kofar is like all forest. It's quite like Kashyyyk, which is the homeworld of Wookiees. But there is something different about it. And while I was a little concerned that the characters walk all these distances in this episode without much of an effort, certainly not the Jedi. We see May having some issues, but it was more like well, yeah, it kind of makes sense why they want to put that beat in there. But I thought it was they could have done a bit more with that to communicate how much they're traveling in this episode in the second half. But overall, I'm really happy with this episode. I thought it was fantastic, and I cannot wait for next week. Next week is gonna be absolutely explosive, and I really hope they don't do a swerve and do flashbacks next episode in any significant way, like they did with episode 3. A little bit here and there is fine with me, but I really want to see where this confrontation goes, and so hype. So, anyways, guys, that's me for this week's episode. Really good episode, and be sure to check out my socials for more stuff. And also a reminder that while on the banner here, you can only see Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. I am also on Blue Sky. I'm on Threads, and I'm also on the new app Kara, which is more for artists. But I'm going to be starting sharing some of my Warhammer stuff on there, so keep an eye out on that. Everything will be provided in the description down below, so be sure to check that out. And I'll see you guys next week for another explosive review. Hopefully, fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. We'll see. Cheers, guys. Bye.